BLOCKTV. It's time now for Chain Breakers, where we talk to the top voices in the blockchain and digital assets ecosystem. We're joined now by Bruce Fenton, CEO and founder of Atlantic Financial, Chainstone Labs, and the Satoshi Roundtable Retreats, to discuss some of the latest news in the crypto space. Bruce, firstly, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, so Bruce, this week I understand we want to discuss 3 things you're eager to look out for in 2020, starting off with a conversation about custody and UI improvements. All right, Bruce, what would you say is the key focus when you're looking for these 2020 trends in this particular field?
Well, it's interesting, Peter Schiff had a lot of flack online because he lost access to his private keys, and a lot of people sort of criticized that. I took a little different view on it, which is I think it's something that, and there's a lot of really great people working on this, but I think that it's something we should be supporting the people who are working on making these user interfaces better. It's really, not ideal if anybody loses their money or, has to worry about it getting stolen and these kind of things. Those are realities, and it's part of the, the benefit of Bitcoin is that it's irreversible, but that does make it very appealing to thieves and susceptible to user error or sometimes technical errors. So those things I think are really important to focus on in the future. Custody is another one as well.
Certainly. I mean, the classic model, of course, in the crypto space, it was seen in the early days of Bitcoin as a revolutionary model. And so the idea of the not your keys, not your coins sort of idea really was the driving force for early adopters. But now as, let's say, the less sophisticated users get into the crypto space, is that model still viable? Is that something we should be striving for? And if we don't, are we not risking watering down the crypto digital asset revolution?
That's a great point. It is part of the core ethos of what the entire technology is all about, the ability to have control of your own money and your own assets. However, in the real world, there's a lot of people who don't really want that. And I don't think a lot of people have thought about the ramifications of this. There's a lot of regular, normal Americans, dentists and doctors who are millionaires. And if they had a couple $100,000 in Bitcoin, that's a big risk for them. They probably don't have a couple $100,000 in cash in their house or gold. But if they had a couple $100,000 in Bitcoin, that makes a whole bunch of new people targets of theft and targets of higher level fraud and these kind of things. Personally, I wouldn't want to have that kind of money in something that somebody could just pull a gun on and steal. Banks were invented for a reason. Custodians were invented for a reason. I see this technology as being able to replace trusted parties and central banks. But I think people should have the option to be able to use custodians. And I mean, they clearly have that option, but I think that that's something that a lot of people should take advantage of because, life is complex, particularly if you're something like a professional investment advisor like Peter Schiff, where you have, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars under your responsibility. You'd have to be crazy to want to put that into your own custody.
Yeah, certainly, that idea of keeping the cash under the mattress seems a little archaic, and even on a cold wallet, it's still the basic principle there seems to be somewhat the same, that risk of loss, theft and damage, and we've seen that already with potentially, by various estimates, over 1 million Bitcoin out there lost to the simple fact that, when someone loses the keys or the cold wallet itself, forgets a password or whatever it may be, these things are gone. So looking forward into the future of 2020, do you see good potential custody solutions out there, or do you think that development still needs to take place?
Yeah, there's a lot of custody, and that's been something that a lot of groups have been working on. Regulated entities like investment brokers, broker-dealers, these kind of groups have a lot of regulations around custody. And there's a lot of other groups that need to work with something called a qualified custodian or different custodians that have different qualifications in different states or with different regulators. So that's been kind of a slow rollout just because of the heavy regulatory lift and also because custody is so tricky. Any regulator or insurance company involved is going to look at it very, very carefully. But there's a lot of companies that have been working on that for a while now. There's several of the large, stable, really high quality companies in this space are focused on custody. I think that at least some of them seem to be doing a good job. And they're also making alliances with more of these large mainstream brokers and banks and mainstream entities like that. So I think that in the future, you're going to see a lot of people who will have their custody just like they have their stocks, or their cash custodied at banks and brokerage firms.
All right, certainly could be the developed future of the crypto and digital assets industry. We'll have to see how that one pans out. But now let's switch and pivot for a moment over to a key story of 2021 we've known for a long time is coming, but can't help but get excited for regardless. Of course, I'm talking about the Bitcoin halving set for the middle of May this year. Now, Bruce, I'm eager to hear your opinion on this because the debate has been raging between those tied to the stock-to-flow model, others who say the efficient market hypothesis means that it's already been priced in. Has it been priced in? Has it not? Bruce, help us break it down here. There seems to be so much debate raging.
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of people ask it. I think it has been priced in the sense that all the information is known and the market actors are acting based on that information. It's not inside information, it's not secret information. And that's kind of really impossible in Bitcoin, which is one great thing about a decentralized open source protocol and project like that, is that there isn't really any secrets. There's no one who can have inside information. Even a lead developer couldn't have information that would give them necessarily an advantage. I suppose if they knew there was a critical bug or something, but then you get kind of out there on the likelihood scenario. But in general, it's very, very hard to know anything, have information about Bitcoin that isn't already known and figured in by a large number of people. And so people are kind of, making their bets based on the risk of what they see here. So it is priced in. However, historically, there's been market reaction, and there is the very real supply and demand, which is different from the current pricing in. Things do change. There's a lot of factors that will affect what the price is of Bitcoin in 6 months or 5 years. And this is one of them. And it's not totally predictable, but certainly could go either way.
Bruce, given that we're talking about Bitcoin as an emerging market here, in the sense of people are only starting to gather awareness at a mass scale of what this market actually is and how it works, despite the fact that this information does exist out there in the public domain, is it has Bitcoin hit the tipping point of becoming a truly efficient market, in the sense that it's factoring in all that information for every potential actor who could enter it at this point? And does that mean that it's already truly priced in? Or could the new actors coming into the sphere who are just learning this information somehow impact that and therefore help cause a bit of a run-up, as it were?
That's a great question. I think it's pretty efficient market. It's got large daily volumes, $20 billion, $30 billion, comparable to the largest companies in the world. Because the market is global and 24/7, I think you could definitely argue that it's more efficient than something like Apple, which is larger. Apple doesn't have as many, as broad of ownership. You can't trade Apple in a lot of countries. Bitcoin is all over. There's a lot of small holders, a lot of people who control it themselves, custody it. So, I think it's pretty efficient. The big, large, publicly traded companies on the global markets are considered pretty efficient. I think that Bitcoin is definitely, based on trading volume, overall asset size, a rough estimate of number of accounts and holders, which you don't quite have the same as you would with a publicly traded company. I think it's pretty efficient. But it's also very volatile and ever changing, and it's still sort of experimental. So while it's efficient, and everybody has fair information, it can change on a dime. It could change completely. And I do want to always make it clear, Bitcoin is very, very risky. I'm a fan, but it is very, very speculative, and you could lose everything that you have in it. There could be unforeseen issues that nobody's thought of yet. And there could be foreseen issues that we have, where they're regulatory or other issues or potential competition or something like that, which could make people lose interest. And that's the main thing that Bitcoin has to fear is apathy. It's shown that it's resistant to attacks, and it's resistant to government attacks and these kind of things. Apathy is probably its biggest threat, which we don't have right now. People are pretty interested in it.
And certainly there does seem to be a lot of interest abounding at the moment, but perhaps sage wisdom that everyone should heed. Always be careful when investing in this space. It is still new. It is still plenty of risk out there. But one sphere that perhaps might help to mitigate some of that risk, I'm not sure, at least is another area that's not so prone to risk, is the third area you've pointed out, signaled out as a key focus for trends in 2020, that of blockchain-based gaming. Now, there are so many facets to this, whether we talk about the gambling space, non-fungible tokens, digital record keeping, a fascinating array of things. Bruce, what catches your eye when it comes to the blockchain-based gaming space?
Well, I always think it's interesting, and there's a lot of people who, like Tim Ferriss and other authors, who've said, if you can catch sort of two trends that are combined, or two things that are going on, and where they overlap, can sometimes be very exciting. So gaming, and I'm particularly talking about video gaming, is a huge industry. It's just absolutely astronomical. The quality of games, the amount of money that's being put in, how mainstream they are. Demographics has changed. You have baby boomers now, certainly Generation Xers, and everybody younger than Generation X, where gaming is just part of their life. So it's a huge industry, $20 billion in the United States, billions more globally, and the quality of the content and everything is just continuing to increase. So if there's overlap in this blockchain and Bitcoin industry, which is also very exciting and fast growing, that's kind of potential for hyper interest. I don't want to say hyper growth because it's very risky. We don't know it's going to be growth, but it's certainly hyper interesting because you have these two fast growing areas. So I'm really interested in anybody working on gaming because I think there's a lot of potential. In-game economies are billions and billions of dollars. There's a lot of people who care a lot about a magic suit of armor in Warhammer or a castle in Ultima Online or whatever. They trade these digital items. They care about them. People buy lots and lots of digital items, even on something like an iOS game that they know they're not going to really keep, or they may not have their character for that long. People care about these things. So it's a nice area that's fun. And maybe when you said risk, it's interesting. It's certainly not less risky from an investment. If you go and invest in these gaming companies, those are probably very high risk startups. But there is other risks. It's less regulatory issues. If you're having something like a suit of armor that's represented by a token and it gets lost or deleted, that could be a problem. You could have angry customers. Maybe you need to refund them. But it's unlikely to be a regulatory issue. Whereas if you go and create a securities token and you lose the customer's money, you're in big trouble. So I think that it is very, very interesting. And I'm particularly interested in the behind the scenes, what the technology actually does with non-fungible tokens and some of these other things. Really interesting.
It certainly is interesting, but moving beyond, I suppose, the sort of, I'll say for lack of a better term, vanilla gaming space, what about talking about gambling? Because that's been a big focus for many in the digital asset space, to see that as a potential source of revenue, accessibility, openness to new markets. Do you think that is a potential growth market from an investor perspective?
It probably is a huge market. My bias is I'm so scared of it because of the regulatory issues. I wouldn't touch gambling at all. Just like cannabis, I think those are probably both great markets. Just my personal risk tolerance, if I was advising clients, it's just not my thing. There's people who are better experts at managing that kind of risk. Crypto's enough risk for me. So my own bias says to stay away, but they are probably extraordinary opportunities. Gambling is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry. These kind of ultra risky sort of, very regulated, risky industries, they can be managed by people who know how to do it, people who are really good at getting the good, proper compliance teams. And there's now a lot of professional, publicly traded companies that are working in these very high risk areas like gambling. So, my personal bias says to stay away, but if you have the right kind of money manager and the right kind of experts that are doing it, probably a really extraordinary opportunity for sure.
And certainly, it's, as you say, Bruce, that confluence of fields between blockchain, gaming. It seems that they're both growing exponentially. Perhaps they can be a marriage of two minds and create whole new industries along the way. Bruce Fenton, I want to thank you so much for highlighting these key trends, looking out towards 2020. Plenty to come, plenty for us to continue to discuss. So for those at home, keep watching at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Westropp-Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.